Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Rangers Review evening briefing, our second video today. It has been a quite momentous day as far as Rangers Football Club are concerned, with the removal of Giovanni van Bronckhorst as manager after just over 1 year in charge. We thought we'd record another video this evening just to digest today's events. I'm joined by Jonny McFarlane and Joshua Barrie to talk all things Gio. And we'll start with yourself, Joshua. Jonny, you've been off today, haven't you? But I say often using the Neil Lennon air quotes.
Yes. I've been dealing with a 10-month-old child who is difficult, shall we say. She has her father's genes. So not the easiest person to deal with at the best of times. And trying to do that while keeping on top of what's happening has been pretty difficult, it has to be said. So I've tried my best now. I've got my wife back on the scene and I'm free to actually do some work so we can get our teeth into this. So hopefully Josh can provide us with some insight, because I've been up to my eyeballs in nappies and crying babies and all the rest of it.
Yeah, well, of course, we were on earlier on, Joshua. We broke the news when we went live. It just broke. We sort of got wind just before we went on air. Went on, and of course, the statement from Rangers was delivered whilst we're on air. Now, that's just if you're just joining us, folks. If you're not aware of the news, Giovanni van Bronckhorst has been dismissed as Rangers manager. Rangers released a statement earlier on this morning. Douglas Park, the chairman, commented on it and he thanked Gio for his 12 months of hard work. But he said that the recent results neither met the club's or Gio's expectations, and it was time for a change. He said everyone at Rangers wishes Gio all the best going forward. We've been working away today, Joshua. Lots of bits and pieces on the website, folks. I do urge you to go and check it out, mainly because we've got a fantastic offer on. We've launched today a Black Friday deal, £1 for 6 months worth of content. Absolutely sensational offer. Head over to rangersreview.co.uk/subscribe. Joshua, you've had a few hours now to digest the news. What have you made of it all?
Yeah, obviously lots happened today, Derek. It broke, I think, about just after 9:30, our own Chris Jack with the news about maybe just after the half hour. I was surprised that it was happening today. I think most people were surprised it was happening today and not this time last Monday. A lot of people have commented on the fact that it was only on Saturday Giovanni van Bronckhorst did a sit-down interview with Sky Sports looking back on his a year anniversary at that point in the job as Rangers manager. That was filmed before the game against St Mirren. Van Bronckhorst has obviously been on holiday, as we know, like all the players and staff after that game against St Mirren. So that was something that was done prior to that. But I think because of that, most people would have thought that, okay, this signifies that there isn't going to be change in the immediate sense. Rangers might wait until Christmas time, where they might give him a few more games, but it certainly looks like this week has instead been spent weighing up options and kind of considering the position that they find themselves in, which is obviously 9 points behind and not in a very good position on the pitch, which is why they've had to change. And Douglas Park, obviously, I think, or maybe it was a club statement that says performances and results haven't been up to scratch. But as well as that, it's been the fact that there hasn't been enough, I think, within Van Bronckhorst football. There hasn't been enough encouraging signs to perhaps give him more time. We've talked a lot about that, Derek. If there is perhaps better trends on the pitch, maybe the numbers suggested that Rangers have been a bit unlucky, then you can justify giving a manager a bit more time and trusting in that process. But I just don't think, because of a number of factors, that's where we're at, and ultimately why Van Bronckhorst has lost his job. As I understand it, at the moment, the backroom staff, that decision is still to be made on some of those positions. Obviously, Van Bronckhorst, I think, brought in, was it 6 staff overall, if you think of his fitness coach, analyst, Roy Mackay, Dave Voss, Kerry Bowley. We know that Kerry Bowley and Dave Voss also have, if you look at Dave Voss's reputation before he came to Rangers with his youth coaching at Ajax, and Kerry Bowley coming from the City Group, their role is perhaps slightly bigger than the first team. So I guess that will come into consideration looking at their roles, and I guess that news will emerge of that this week. But I guess that's where we stand, Derek. It's just over a year on from Van Bronckhorst getting the job. He's lost it. Lots of runners and riders, kind of contrasting names with different styles and experience, which I've not spent much time looking at them today because obviously we've just kind of been dealing with the actual news. But the only kind of thought I've had on that, or opinion I've put out, is that I think Rangers need a manager who is going to, has the experience of coaching a team who can break down defences, coaching a team who is ball dominant, because you're going to come and inherit this midway through the season if Rangers are to make anything successful of it. I think they need a manager who's going to be able to adapt quickly to life at Ibrox.
Yeah, interesting point has been made. This point by Mad Dog. How much was it payout to Gio and his team? I've heard everything between £3 to £7 million. Not entirely sure that the concrete figure on that, although I did see the Dutch journalist, very renowned Dutch journalist Marcel van der Kraan, speaking to the Telegraph in Holland earlier. He says Rangers will fulfil all its obligations with regard to the contract of the Dutch coach that will continue until next year. We'll try and get exact details on that going forward. Jonny,
quite a lot, Derek. The standard way of dealing with that in football is to continue paying the person the salary until they want to get another job.
Yeah.
The person is effectively put on garden leave, and most people want to get on with their life and want to get on with their managerial career at another club, and you find that they tend to then sever that deal and move to whatever club is offering them an opportunity. Of course, that might not happen. You might end up on the payroll, but I don't think many clubs are keen to sever and then offer a larger payment. That's often something that can be done because it can suit both parties, but it will depend on the circumstance. But I would be very surprised if it was to hit anything like that 7 million figure. I think that's a huge amount. Now we know Gio is contracted for another 2.5 years. It was 3.5 years, wasn't it, when he signed the deal? So it will be significant, but not in that range. I wouldn't have thought.
There's a lot of talk. You mentioned that contract length, Jonny. You're surprised in this day and age that a contract of that duration was handed out initially. Usually, you see the rolling 1-year deals in the main, but it was quite a substantial contract offer that was handed out to Van Bronckhorst at the time.
It seems so on paper, but then you don't know if there's a break clause in there. You don't know what the fine detail of the contract between Van Bronckhorst and Rangers is. It may well not be as watertight as 3.5 years and you have to pay up the whole lot. So, I mean, that'll all come out in the wash. But listen, when Gio walked in, there was a unanimity almost, I mean, this is Rangers. There's never complete agreement. But at the time when he came in, I thought there was a vast majority of people that felt like this is a guy that Rangers are doing really well to get. A World Cup finalist captain, a Champions League winner, a guy with a background of having won trophies, both the Dutch League and Dutch Cups, who'd been involved with the City Group and who's proven leadership throughout his career. So he ticked a lot of boxes.
Yeah.
The question now, I think, is, well, what went wrong? Where did it fall apart for Van Bronckhorst, and what can we learn from that to make sure that the same mistakes are not made? And I think if you start drawing into what Giovanni Van Bronckhorst had done in his career, he'd kind of proven himself to be a cup manager. The predominance of what he achieved in Holland was around cups. I think it was 5 trophies in total, and 4 of them, only 1 league title in 4 years.
Yeah.
And I think what Rangers need is someone who's got a track record of obliterating low blocks. That's where we've been since 2018 when Steven Gerrard walked through the door. Now, he made a massive improvement over the term that he was at the club. But this squad of players, they still have this same problem that they don't look actually that suited, first and foremost, to play in the kind of football that's needed to destroy teams in Scotland. I think when Steven Gerrard, Michael Beale arrived, the game model was about being tight, it would be difficult to beat, about hitting on the break, about the high press. And that's why they were successful in Europe. And that continued right the way up to when Gerrard left and Van Bronckhorst took over. But I don't see many of these players that are naturals in what is, I think, 75% of Rangers games, going up against teams who aren't very ambitious, who look to sit in deep, who look to be organised, who look to push Rangers down the channels and look to isolate their frontman. I don't think Rangers have got a lot of players that rack up the numbers. Now, I think there's been a bit of bad luck. Tom Lawrence is one of those kind of guys. That was a good bit of scouting, a creative bit of scouting, a creative bit of outside the box thinking to go and get him, because he's a guy that's got a ping from long range. He's got a history of scoring goals, a history of creating goals, and an ability to play across the front three, an ability to play as a number 8 if required, and was looking good, but then got injured. So that was one that's gone against Giovanni Van Bronckhorst, but there wasn't enough in terms of the rest of the players that were signed to bring in and make a difference in these crucial areas. And that's further exacerbated for me by what's going on across the city. You've got a manager across there, and Ange Postecoglou, whose entire raison d'etre is about tearing teams apart like a roast chicken. And you know that while Rangers have the quality in that squad to stop Celtic, we saw that in the semi-final, you have no faith whatsoever that Celtic will drop points against anyone but Rangers in this league. And let's be honest, the way Celtic have played against Rangers, you have to say they're a better side over the last 4 or 5 games. Yeah. But more specifically than that, Derek, they just do not look like they're ever going to drop points against an Aberdeen, against a Dundee United, against a Ross County. It doesn't look like it's going to happen. And Rangers need to be able to match that with an intensity, with a style that stands out and that gives you the best opportunity to overcome these type of sides. And that's why I keep saying, and that's why I've got another piece that's going out in the website later on today, Giovanni Van Bronckhorst is a good manager. He's got talent. He showed that. You wouldn't get a Scottish team to a Europa League final, getting past the likes of Dortmund and Leipzig, unless you've got something about you. But it's a marriage that didn't work out because Gio's philosophy just ain't suited to the bread and butter Scottish football domestic scene. It's as simple as that. He hasn't been helped by factors. Maybe the transfer business wasn't as focused as it should have been. I think there's a lot of good players in there, but maybe it wasn't as focused as it shouldn't have been. Maybe the money should have been, well, I think definitely the money should have been distributed more towards central midfield. Injuries have been horrendous, and a lot of them have come on the back of impact injuries as opposed to muscle complaints. And, this is a problem across Europe because of the condensed calendar with the World Cup. He's been a bit unlucky with regards to that. But I think the next guy that comes in at Rangers has to be someone that you can point to a track record of league success over and over again. Now, those are going to be difficult to come by. Those are guys that are you might have to be creative with. Now, for example, a Michael Beale, who I think ticks a lot of Rangers boxes, his success would come from playing under Steven Gerrard. Coaching under Steven Gerrard in the 55 season. But again, I think that would be a big gamble for Michael Beale, as much as he does tick a lot of the boxes. Is there someone out there that has got success of chalking up title after title after title in a league that's similar to Scotland, where there's a big fish that has to play in a certain way to disrupt the block? That's what Rangers need primarily. That's the number one thing they need, a coach that has ability to break down these kind of defences.
Yeah, interesting. Points coming in here. David Brennan likes your roast chicken analogy. He says a roast chicken. Lol. I did enjoy that myself, I have to say. And a point here from Jamie Brown, a good friend of the show. Hi, Jamie. We need an all-out attacking approach with high levels of fitness. As Jonny says, the squad needs an overhaul, and we need goal scorers. What do you make of that, Joshua? Whoever comes in, whoever Gio's replacement is, and I'm hoping it's not an interim option. Rangers need someone in here for the long haul, and they need someone with fresh ideas and is able to overhaul an aging squad because major surgery is required.
Yeah, I think what ultimately undid Van Bronckhorst was because the football domestically hasn't been free flowing for really his whole year. I think apart from that kind of month-long run when he first came into the club, it was very good. I think it was a perfect record in his first 9 games before the winter break, aside from the 1-1 draw away in Lyon. I could be wrong with that, but I'm pretty sure that's right. What's undone him, I think, in the last number of weeks has been that the performances, while they haven't always been there, now the results caught up with him eventually. And I've got a piece on the website which you can read alongside a number of other pieces, as you say, with that great Black Friday deal, Derek, which kind of highlights some of the numbers below Van Bronckhorst's dismissal. What were they creating in front of goal? Why they've averaged the most shots per 90 in the league this season. But if you look a little bit deeper at that, the quality of shot, the distance of shot, it's nowhere near as good. So the quantity over quality argument obviously kind of stands up there. Looking at some individual performers, the goalkeeping position, Antonio Cholak's goals drying up. There's a good example for me as a game. You remember the 2-1 Dundee United game at home, which I think it was before the September international break, and it was a terrible game. And Rangers, they weren't holding on at the end, but Dundee United had a few corners, and you'd kind of seen that movie before. Rangers were so fragile, despite facing the Dundee United team that were so fragile themselves in that moment. Antonio Cholak, if you remember his 2 goals in that day, they weren't high-value chances. I think their expected goals was 0.13 each. But when he was in that vein of form, he was kind of able to get them through games like that. When that dried up, when he wasn't able to do that every single game, which I don't think any forward, and some forwards in world football will be able to do that, but they won't be playing in Scotland. Livingston at home is a good example. When those goals started to dry up, I think the chance creation, because it wasn't as high, Rangers struggled to score and generate the chances required to break down teams. The St Johnstone game's a perfect example where Rangers had 29 shots, and that's kind of the top line. But again, you look below that and there's just not much there. So, yeah, absolutely, I agree with Jonny that they need someone who has a track record of winning football domestically. I don't think that comes in one form. I don't think they need to necessarily only have one style of play, although you are going to have to break down defences constantly in Scotland. But the issue for Van Bronckhorst, sorry, I've spoken too much today, Derek, to go back to the main point, I think, was that the performances, there wasn't that solidity when the performances offensively dried up, and that's why you go and drop points against St Johnstone, Livingston and St Mirren as well.
Yeah, lots of comments come in, Jonny, and a lot of people saying that Van Bronckhorst is taking the blame, and often when things don't go well at football clubs, it's the manager that carries the can, of course. Does Ross Wilson, is the jury out on his performance under Van Bronckhorst as well? A lot of comments come in saying that they're not happy with the director of football at the moment. Are you confident he can appoint the right man after today's news that Giovanni Van Bronckhorst is away?
Well, I think Ross Wilson personally deserves the chance to appoint another manager. He's only appointed one. Remember, he came into the scene at Rangers when Steven Gerrard was in charge. I don't think Giovanni Van Bronckhorst has been a total failure. He won the Scottish Cup for the first time in over a decade. He took Rangers to a Europa League final. In the league, it's not worked. There's no doubt about that. And that's the overall picture at Rangers. It's just fundamental. You need to win the league. But he's not been a disaster like a Pedro Caixinha or a Paul Le Guen. It hasn't worked out, and now is the right time to let him go. But I don't think it's one of those ones where you have to say, right, we need to rip this up and start again, and Ross Wilson needs to go alongside him. The whole point of a sporting director in the modern era is to have a level of continuity between club and the manager. And if Rangers are going to go and get rid of the sporting director at the same time as the manager, then that's a hell of an omission of dysfunction at the club. And you've got to remember, Ross Wilson's job is about more than just bringing in signings or bringing in managers. You know, he has got a vast remit that covers the whole of the football department. So it's about the youth setup. It's about scouting, of course. It's about standards at the training ground. It's about the women's side. It's about every aspect. And I think he's done a good job in some elements of that. And the one thing about recruitment that people keep come back to, they look at the 26 players that have come in. And I don't think there's been enough of a hit rate on that. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I think a number of signings have failed. And there's been too many signings that have been kind of stabs in the dark or kind of development signings that you hope work out, but don't necessarily work out. You would have preferred to see that money pulled up and used towards someone that could have come in and been a difference maker. That's for certain. But you also have to remember that Rangers' recruitment team has completely changed in the summer. We've had Andy Scolding has gone down to Spurs, and there's a number of others in that department that have departed. John Park's obviously now leading that up, and significant changes going on there. So we'll see whether or not that makes a difference. It certainly should. I think the club have been impressed with what John Park can bring to the table. We know that he was the man that brought Virgil van Dijk to Scottish football, so he's got a record of success with the other half of the old firm. And we'll see whether or not he can deliver. He needs to, because Ross Wilson, I don't think, is going to get a lot more time because the fans are upset. And you know, he's got to get this next appointment right, and he's got to get the next transfer windows right, or he's going to come under intense pressure. But I'm aware that this isn't a popular decision, a popular opinion. That's what I'm saying here. But I believe that there's a real advantage to having a director of football model, and there's a real element of structural superiority it gives you to clubs that don't have that in place. And you just have to go with it and give people an opportunity over a longer time period, because it's a different role to a manager, and it's far more all-encompassing. And whoever's doing that role has a number of things that they have to do. I mean, Ross Wilson is not going out and scouting players himself. You know, there's a scouting department that does that, and that's one element of his role. That's a vast role. But is Ross Wilson under pressure? Of course. He's had a manager that they have had to sack in November, and he appointed that manager. So that's not a good place to be in, is it? And he will come under serious scrutiny over this next appointment, should he remain at the club.
Yeah.
For the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. He has to get it right. There's no doubt about it. That's an interesting point here, Joshua, from King Rec. He said Gio had same trophy list in 1 year as Gerrard had in 4. We need a manager that can do it in the league. Gerrard's domination of Celtic kept us on his side. That was one thing. I think it's a fair comment. Rangers are in a different position than what they were when Steven Gerrard took over. It was pretty much a start from scratch job when Gerrard took over. I think Rangers were in the doldrums, and he took them on to another level. Van Bronckhorst, I think European-wise, certainly took them on to another level, a stratosphere that we could only dream of. He did win that Scottish Cup. Do you think he has a fair point here that it should have been afforded more time like Gerrard was?
Listen, obviously in time, Van Bronckhorst will, I think, predominantly be remembered, not so much for the Scottish Cup, although that was an achievement in the context of the last few years, but those nights at Ibrox, the run in Europe. And as we said this morning, Derek, the fact that he got Rangers as far as they could have. He got them to penalty kicks, and if that penalty goes in, or those couple of penalties go the other way, it's obviously a completely different discussion. Almost none of this matters, because Rangers would have made one of their biggest achievements in their entire history.
Yeah.
But it didn't, and that's how football works, isn't it? And since then, I think ever since that Old Firm defeat, that 4-0 Old Firm defeat, there's felt like there's been a bit of a malaise, because the belief hasn't felt there that Rangers can necessarily go and win the league. And then if you add Europe on top of that, Van Bronckhorst and the rhetoric of Rangers not being able to compete, I think the frustration over signings, all that kind of happened around the same time. And it's felt ever since that no one's kind of ever really been able to recover from that point. I was on a podcast the other day, and I can't remember the quote exactly off the top of my head, but I think it was the Bayer Leverkusen director in an athletic feature, and it was something along the lines of, in football, you can plan 5 years ahead if you win the next game. And I think that is a good descriptor of the situation as well at the moment. Rangers have been in a terrible run of form. There's been nothing really to suggest that they would get out of it. It feels very much like last season at points when it seemed like the wheels were coming off domestically. Think of the game that immediately preceded Van Bronckhorst coming into the club, that 3-1 defeat against Hibs when Hibs were 3-0 up, I think, before Rangers got to go back. And that just felt like a total culmination of all the issues that Rangers had experienced last season. And I don't think anyone would disagree with the notion that Rangers should have refreshed their squad more this summer, regardless of money. Should more money have been spent? Could more money have been spent? As Jonny said, should it have been spent in different areas? Should there have been more of a refresh and certain players who were at the end of the contract allowed to move on and new players brought in? So, yeah, Van Bronckhorst will, I think, definitely be remembered, of course, for that European run. But at the moment, people are thinking about this season, and if they can't see that this season is going to be successful, I think that's why there was so much pressure and why we're obviously having this chat today.
Yeah, interestingly, I heard that. Earlier on, I heard that Van Bronckhorst called the Rangers office staff and workers to thank them for all their work over the last year, which shows you the calibre of the man. And Jonny, I think he represented the club tremendously well. I felt he's a right good ambassador for Rangers. He spoke about his love of the club often. He was a pleasure to deal with in press conferences. You've encountered him at times as well. I think everyone would wish him well going forward. Just at the end of the day, football is a results-driven business, and unfortunately, a decision had to be made. But I think no one can deny they have a lot of love for Van Bronckhorst, not only from his time as a player, but certainly his time as a manager. He held himself with real high regard, didn't he?
Absolutely. He was a pleasure to deal with. He would answer any question, and he would answer it courteously.
Yeah.
If you asked a slightly daft question, he wouldn't have a go at you and kind of pull it apart like some managers do, looking to belittle people who are asking the questions. This is sort of a problem with the job at times. If you're not absolutely certain about the way you're asking the questions, sometimes you can get picked apart. But Giovanni Van Bronckhorst was always a class act in press conferences. Always clearly a nice man. The questions he was asked, he really, really got put under pressure in press conferences. I mean, particularly, I would give him a wee shout out. Stevie Clifford, who friend of the show, is in the press conferences. The Four Lads Had a Dream blogger who was on earlier, obviously, really, really grilled him at times, and Giovanni Van Bronckhorst absolutely stood up to that and stood up to the intensity of that, and handled himself with class and dignity that's befitting the office of Rangers manager. So you just have to wish him all the best, because anyone who actually had person-to-person dealings with him would tell you, I mean, he's a cracking guy who doesn't run away from tough questions, and has always been, I think, pretty open and fair in his dealings with us when we've had the chance to talk to him.
Yeah, I found him spot on. What about you, Joshua? The times you've spoken to him, I've always felt he's pretty open, as Jonny says. He'll answer any question. He is media savvy. He's been in the game long enough. He knows how to answer the difficult questions. But unlike maybe his predecessor or other Rangers managers, he didn't feel that perhaps that aura, maybe that went against him with some supporters with regards to the time that he was afforded to get things right at Ibrox. Maybe too nice as some of the comments that are coming in. But how did you find him when you were quizzing him?
Totally agree with Jonny. I think you get a feel for how kind of people are when they're under pressure and in intense moments. So they've suffered heavy defeats, and I think Van Bronckhorst was never someone that spoke down to people or was condescending. He didn't snap back at people. I think he was always really respectful. And it might sound a bit silly, kind of, reeling that off, because that's, I think, character traits that most people would hope they are. But I think in the intensity of a manager's position, like the Rangers manager's job, in comparison to maybe some other managers and the way they deal with journalists, I think he was very respectful. And obviously there's the human element to someone losing their job, in spite of the fact that Van Bronckhorst is, will have earned a lot in his playing and managing days. He'll have come to Rangers because he wanted to be a success and take a next step in his management career. But it's obviously not worked out as he would have hoped, or as the club would have hoped, or any of the support. So yeah, I agree with you. Obviously, wish him all the best, but I also think it was the right decision, because as I think everyone is kind of agreeing, all us three on the video today and others, I don't think there was necessarily future success in Van Bronckhorst football domestically. And as a result, the intervening period, unless something was going to change, was only going to be an interlude until someone else came in, because of the nature of results and the way they've trended in recent months.
Yeah. Every single one of us here is on record as saying we felt that Giovanni Van Bronckhorst time's up. Different times, obviously. I felt that after the St Johnstone game, that was it. I still felt at Livingston you couldn't move to sack him at that point. I thought you had to give him the opportunity. For me, it's very important that Rangers have only had 17, well, very soon to be 18 managers in 150 years. I think that's something to be proud of, that sets Rangers apart as a club from others. And that element of the club needs to be cherished. Now, I don't think for a minute in the next 150 years it's going to be the same level, that you're going to have so few managers, but it does add a level of well, it makes the manager's position something special, doesn't it, that so few people have been able to walk in those shoes. And that's something I think the club are right not to just be trigger happy when it comes to Rangers managers. They've had to be in the past. Pedro Caixinha and Paul Le Guen, I think those decisions were absolutely right. But if you can give a Rangers manager time, then I think you should. That's the way the club has historically been running, and I think that's the right time and the right way to do it. But I think this time, should I say, sorry, it was the right decision by the board. The board had given him a lot of leeway. I think a lot of supporters felt like he should have been given the bullet earlier, to use a sort of a slightly less than charitable parlance there. But ultimately, they waited, and I think they were correct to wait. And now is the right time to actually make that decision. The next manager, if they can get him in quickly, will have effectively a mini pre-season, which I think is huge.
Yeah,
and that sets us out as slightly different from other mid-season changes of managers in Rangers history. But one thing I would say, just having a wee think about these changes in recent years, Gio coming in mid-season worked. It absolutely did work. Didn't work domestically ultimately, but it worked in terms of the Europa League, and I don't think many people would have swapped that ultimately, given the experiences that was had on the journey, especially with winning the Scottish Cup and beating Celtic in the semi-final. But if you look back to Mark Warburton, dismissed, I thought very unlucky to be dismissed when he was. Pedro came in that season, didn't he? And almost by the time you reach the summer, Pedro was a busted flush almost, because he'd performed so poorly with that failing squad that the pressure was really on for him to go out and get players, and kind of it never really got started, did it? And the same thing kind of happened as well when Pedro left and Graham Murty took it on, and you're saying to yourself, this is just an impossible situation to come in halfway through the season. It's very, very rare that works out. So whoever it is has to be a special character, special candidate. That's for sure. I don't know if you guys have any names. I know there's a lot of names that are doing the rounds. Some of them more impressive than others.
Yeah, we're going to lead on to that, John. I was going to ask you though, in terms, you mentioned the timing and the decision. Was it a surprise to you today that it took? I mean, that's into a week. Were you surprised it wasn't done early, just after the St Mirren game?
Yeah, I was. I get that it wouldn't necessarily be done right after the St Mirren game. I think it's a big decision. As I say, 17 managers in the history of the club. So you would expect it to take a couple of days, especially if you're talking about a financial settlement, etc., or clearing up the contract situation as to what's going to happen. So when it didn't happen, I felt like that it was liable that Gio would be given time to bring some of these players back from injury and get stuck in again. I felt like that was the wrong decision, but it seemed to me obvious that that's what was going to happen. So yeah, I was like everyone else, very surprised this morning. I was perhaps even more surprised than people, because I really felt that he wasn't going to be removed at this stage. So
yeah,
it's certainly been an interesting day.
Certainly has. Right, let's talk about potential replacements, because there's been a host of names being mentioned throughout the course of the day. I agree with Malcolm McLean, who incidentally says, "Get Bomber Brown in." Couldn't agree more. That'll get them. That'll get them into shape. I don't know what Mark Fullerton's been on today, but he says Arsene Wenger would make a great Rangers manager.
That's more like it.
Yeah, there was a boy earlier on this morning. Sorry, I forgot your name, but he said Mikel Arteta, bring him home. That's what I say. Jamie Warnock says Duncan Ferguson, Bielsa or Beale. I've got to say, Jonny, and I know you've commented on it as well, I would absolutely love Marcelo Bielsa to come up to Ibrox. Look at Joshua shaking his head.
Incredible. It would be incredible. I don't know how well it would work, but it'd be great fun.
Just watching, I mean, it'll be, we've talked about the turgid football and the horseshoe and what have you. This would be rock and roll, would it not, Jonny?
Oh, yeah, it'd be incredible. It would be bonkers, but incredible. I mean, the one thing you would be sure of with Bielsa would be that there would never, ever be any questions about fitness ever again. That's for sure. The realism, though, about Bielsa, and it's important to be said, we can romanticise it and imagine it, and we've got a wee window where we can do that. But let's be realistic. I think Bielsa was on £7 million a year at Leeds. And listen, he's a guy that is in high demand and deserves that kind of salary because of what he's achieved in football and what he's done in past clubs. Now, a caveat that by saying that I don't think money is Marcelo Bielsa's main motivator. I think 67 he is now. But, let's be realistic. I don't think he's going to see Rangers as his next post. And even if he did, it might not be the case that Rangers would see him as the ideal guy to come in. But if you're talking about dream scenarios based on who's out of work at the moment, I mean, Bielsa's got to top most people's list, doesn't he?
Yeah. Listen, I don't think many people in Leeds would have thought they would come to their club, and I know for a fact they were all amazed when he pitched up at Elland Road. But he's a legend down there now, not just for the football, but he's quite a character as well. He used to always walk to training and meet people in supermarkets and what have you. He's just, what a character. And Joshua, we touched on it earlier before. For guys like you, the tactics guys, the guys that want to know the forensic detail around football, Bielsa really is the epitome, isn't he?
Yeah, but and interestingly, he's one of these managers who's not got this reputation because he's won hundreds of things. He's got the reputation because of the way he's obviously been a bit of a trailblazer with some trends within football. But I think the only league title he's won, I can't remember if he won the championship with Leeds or went up a second. Someone can let me know in the comments. But I think certainly before that, the only league title he'd won was the kind of 16-game Argentinian or 18-game Argentinian top flight. So if we're talking about someone who's got a track record of winning league titles, and I don't know if he's the person. In realistic terms, it's such an important managerial appointment to get right, because this is going to be a manager who does help rebuild the squad. Obviously, we've spoken a lot about the transfer dealings and the way that's done in the club. Certainly, he's not going to be the solely responsible for signing players, but he's going to be responsible as the one who takes that squad into pre-season next season and has another go at having a successful season, which from this point will be difficult. They're going to inherit a difficult situation, although, as we saw with Van Bronckhorst this time last year, we were having the exact same conversation and he had such a good run up until Christmas. So I don't know. Again, I'm looking forward to looking a little bit more about the kind of names tomorrow and having a bit more of a look into some of the names linked, as opposed to just kind of what my preconceptions are of said managers. But to go back to something we said at the start, I think you need a manager who knows what it's like to manage a side who are ball dominant, who can break down defences, who can play exciting and football and make it effective. That has to be the main aim. But certainly when you're going up against the defences that the Rangers are week in, week out, if you bring in a manager that has to learn how to coach that way or adapt to that, I don't know if that's the best decision, given the point in the season he's going to take over, as Jonny obviously alludes to with previous examples.
Yeah, I love this comment from Ryan Stewart. He says, imagine Morelos doing murder ball training. He's renowned for that, the murder ball. Not only that, I mean, there's other teams that Bolton are covered as well, that they actually adopt that. And when we spoke to the players down there about it, they say it's absolutely horrendous. But Bielsa famous for adopting the old famous murder ball in training.
People are going to come into this, Eric, and think that we are pitching Bielsa for the Rangers job, which we're not. So I'm already seeing comments.
Listen, I think he's one of a number of names that have been mentioned today. Some others include the likes of Sean Dyche. I think it's an easy suggestion given he's out of work at the moment. And he was talking about, I think he's been doing the rounds in terms of the media organisations. He ideally wants a job back in the Premier League. However, I'm sure that you'd be open to a discussion at Rangers. And similarly, Ralph Hasenhüttl, Jonny, is a name that won't go away. He's worked with Ross Wilson before at Southampton. And he's obviously been sacked recently from his job at Southampton as well. He's one that's doing the rounds. The Bodo Glimt manager is an interesting one because that's been around about for some time now. Do you know much about Knutsen, and would you be opposed to him coming in? For me, I'm a bit surprised why he's not left them before, and I would be surprised if he would take the Rangers job. That's not to say he might not take it, but would he be a name that you would be interested in possibly exploring?
I mean, what I would say about Knutsen is fundamentally, I watched the two games against Celtic, and they were outstanding for a team. I think their budget is something like half of what Aberdeen's budget is. So he's done a remarkable work up there in the Arctic Circle. Not a place where it's easy to attract players. You better believe it. And since 2018, when he took over, he's done remarkable work. But 2 titles in Norway. His coaching career outside of Bodo Glimt is teams that you've never heard of unless you're a football manager expert. I mean, even then, Hovdling, Asan. I mean, teams I think in lower levels of Norwegian football.
Yeah.
So it's a big ask for him to go from Bodo Glimt, aged 54. Capacity of their ground 8,300 in the Arctic Circle, to fiery 50,000 at Ibrox week in, week out. And listen, I talked about earlier on about the marriage between Giovanni van Bronckhorst and Rangers being a failure of philosophy. It can work the other way. It can be a marriage between the perfect philosophy in Rangers and not work because of the personality. And I would have serious reservations about that aspect of going out and getting a guy like Knutsen, who obviously you admire the work that he's done at that club, but it's just such a huge jump to a team that's got a ground that's smaller than St Johnstone's to Glasgow Rangers Football Club. And there's a lot about managing this institution that's about personality, that's about being an alpha male, that's about leading a group of really, really passionate supporters and taking on all comers, creating a sense of everyone's in it together against everyone else. That sense that you get in Scottish football, that you need, because there'll be times when you need to harness that. And is that element that Steven Gerrard, to be fair to him, got so brilliantly right in his tenure? Is that going to be something that's going to be provided by a guy that's coming from a club with 8,300 seats in the stadium? It might be, but that is one hell of a jump, Derek. Yeah. That unknown for me, and that's something that would worry me. You talked about Sean Dyche. I think Sean Dyche would get that element of Rangers. Where I'd have serious reservations about Sean Dyche is the style of football. You know, where's the evidence that Sean Dyche can create teams that are on the attack, that are bulldozing in other teams, that are breaking them down? I think he's a good coach, and he's done brilliant stuff at Burnley over his time there. Okay, it ended in relegation, but over the course of his time there, it was outstanding. He took them from pretty much a kind of yo-yo club between League One and the Championship, established them there up into the Premier League, and they were a force to be reckoned with under Dyche. But Rangers is another thing entirely. I don't see a lot of evidence in the Dyche CV that would make me really excited about him turning up at Rangers. Now, he's an intelligent football man, and it may well be that you could absolutely bring those things to the table. I just don't think there's a lot of evidence there to suggest that he could. I don't know. You may have a completely different take on that.
Yeah, listen, the Dyche one's an interesting one. You certainly have that sort of British appeal that a lot of supporters want, a British manager that knows the game. Scottish football is unlike anywhere else in the world, I think. Other names that are suggested today, Sinisa Mihailovic, I've seen fancies the job. The former Serbian centre-back. What a player he was in his day. He was formerly in charge of Bologna. Other names, I mean, Gordon Petric, who I'm speaking to tomorrow. He's doing really well at Partizan Belgrade. So he's obviously an ex-Ranger. I think he's doing a really decent job out there at the moment. He's got a decent track record. But is there any other names, Joshua, that you've seen today you're thinking that they would fit the mould as the sort of person you would like to see take over?
Well, I agree with Jonny on Dyche. I don't think it's to say that someone like him couldn't be successful, but if you're looking at the evidence that he can coach the type of situation and manage the type of games that the Rangers would be involved in, obviously week in, week out, I'd be surprised if he was the option, given the style of play at Burnley. And again, as we discussed this morning, I think, Derek, that's not to say that I think he's pigeonholed as a manager. He obviously done a fantastic job with not only the resources he had at Burnley, but the consistency with which he did it. I can't remember how many seasons off the top of my head he was there, but it's difficult to be in the Premier League on that those type of resources and survive. But is he the best choice for Rangers at the moment? I don't know. Obviously, the other big name mentioned is Beale. Beale, you know what you're getting with him to a degree, but also maybe not, because although he had huge responsibility under Gerrard, he wasn't the manager. His decision wasn't final, and although the training, we know how much he took of that, because Gerrard himself said that on numerous occasions, he was not the man that was ultimately responsible. We don't know exactly how that would play out. There might be some differences. I'd be interested to know, for example, how much I've not watched too much of Beale at QPR, but how much of the style of play that Gerrard then took to Villa, the fact that he stayed with that, was that down showing that Gerrard was maybe the one who didn't want to change things up as much, or was Beale the one that wanted to keep it the same? So I guess it would be a little bit of a blast from the past because he was here so recently. And then again, we touched on it this morning. It didn't go great towards the end of the Gerrard and Beale era. There were certainly some difficulties towards the start of last season. Beale, when he was speaking on I think it was a BT Sport podcast recently, said that he thought Rangers are coming out of that and they would have definitely won the league. Obviously, he probably is going to say that. So I guess he's the other big name. It's a really difficult decision. And sitting here just now, I don't really have a favourite, because, as I say, I've not read too much about it. But over the week, I think we've got a piece tomorrow which is outlining some of these names from Caskey, Patrick Caskey, obviously our scouting writer, and amongst lots of other content this week.
Yeah, and the some he's mentioned that nobody's, I've never heard of them, and nobody's in the comments has mentioned them as well, which shows you his extensive knowledge in the game. And this is another name that I've seen linked, Jonny, Gerardo Sioni, or I'm not too sure how you pronounce that. He was previously in charge of Bayer Leverkusen. Apparently got a decent track record, winning cups back in his native Switzerland. Can't say I know too much about him, to be honest. Well, other names that have been mentioned.
Quite interesting, Derek. Yeah, because this is a guy who was in charge of young boys of Bern, and he was the manager when Rangers faced them under Steven Gerrard in the Europa League.
Yeah,
they were quite an enjoyable sight to watch. They had two terrific strikers. I can't remember their names off the top of my head. I think Jean-Pierre Nsame was one of them. The other guy was another kind of very, very good finisher, nippy player, but I can't remember his name, actually. He's not there anymore. But they looked pretty good over that period that we saw them, those two games. And he actually won the Swiss Super League with them 3 years running, as well as a Swiss Cup. So you've got a guy that is used to playing a certain attacking style. The job that he did there led to a move to Bayer Leverkusen, obviously a very, very big club in Germany. That didn't work out. It's 46.43 win percentage there. He got given 56 games, but he only won 26, lost 20. So not a successful period at Leverkusen, and now he's looking for a new job. But if you're looking purely at what he achieved at Young Boys, then you have to say it's pretty impressive. 65.54% win ratio there. Notable for playing a 4-4-2, which is very unusual. One of the most.
That's what I say.
Well, I thought you might say that, Derek. One of the most direct coaches in European football at the time. Second most long passes per 90 in the Swiss Super League. In the first season when they won the league for the first time under him. And someone who utilises fullbacks in quite an interesting way. They'll often push on high and wide, offering support. Rangers have got players that can do that. And his team effectively, certainly in the Swiss League, it went from a 4-4-2 to a kind of 2-4-4. And that's how they overloaded teams. And I think at one point, Derek, I might be wrong on this, I think when Rangers played them, or certainly around that time, they had got such a gargantuan league. The league was almost basically over by December. I think it was something like 15 points they were clear. Because they just obliterated the opposition. Now, I've not spent an awful lot of time looking at this at this manager. I'm going to leave the pronunciations to you. I'm not even going to try because I've not had a chance to actually check the pronunciation. But
well, I'm on his Wikipedia, Johnny, and if you go on his Wikipedia, folks, his name, it says he's also known as Staunch Jerry. So it's already been in there. So yes, he's already been edited. So it looks like a shoe-in for the job based on his Wikipedia. But certainly his odds have been slashed anyway.
Yeah, he speaks German, Spanish, English, French, Italian, and Portuguese. So a man who can, I think, deal with multiple different nationalities across his squad. But listen, who knows? Pedro Caixinha emerged in Scotland with a very impressive resume of success in Mexico, and it didn't translate. There's nothing to suggest that Swiss football would translate to Scottish football. This is something that I think the Rangers board will be tasked with. Certainly Ross Wilson will be involved in it as well. And boiling down these candidates to look at who's the most likely, who wants it to provide what Rangers need. Because, listen, even if we think the league's over, and I'm sorry, but I think the league's over. The Scottish Cup's there and the League Cup's there. And in many ways, what this is a carbon copy of what Alex McLeish faced when he came in. He took over from Dick Advocaat. McLeish was lucky enough to have a post-Christmas European football to look forward to. And we're very unlucky that Rangers team to go out to PSV. Pierre Van Hooijdonk inspired PSV, who actually went on to win the tournament, if my memory is correct.
Feyenoord it was.
Oh, sorry, Feyenoord, you're right. Sorry, not PSV. 100%. Sorry, yes. My memory playing tricks on me there. But other than that, he came in, and in that first season, he slowly but surely rebuilt the confidence of the players. He took over a good squad and just had to kind of refresh them and re-energise them. And Rangers that season stole the Scottish Cup and the League Cup back from Martin O'Neill's Celtic and played terrifically well in both those games. And that was one where you felt that if whoever's coming in now can have a similar season to that, you're going into the next term. Really, really looking forward to getting your teeth into Celtic. But I just honestly think 9 points against a team that does not lose against the rest of the league, that's going to be very, 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 very difficult. I just can't see it. Some people in the comments saying that they think that the league can be turned around.
I have my doubts. It's effectively 10 points because the goal difference is ridiculous. Positive vibes.
You've got to believe that not only will Celtic slip up, which I don't believe they will, but that Rangers won't under a new manager. They will go on a similar level of instant success, and I think that's extremely unlikely.
Positive Vibe says, I would like to know what Johnny makes of Erling Moe, and the King Rex says, Erling Moe, bartender in The Simpsons. No, he's the manager of Molde, I believe, over in Norway. He's been there for quite some time. 2018, he's been in charge of them since. His win percentage, I'm just looking at it now, 65.29. He won the Norwegian League this year, and he also won the Norwegian Cup. So he's another name that's been linked today, and there'll be loads more, folks. Until another manager is appointed, then it's going to be the who's who of the manager merry-go-round that's going to be linked to the job. And let's be honest, it is such a prestigious job. There's going to be a lot of managers interested in it. And it's a big appointment for Ross Wilson and the Rangers board. They have to get this one right. The last one, I asked Stevie this, Jonny, this morning. In hindsight, do you think Giovanni Van Bronckhorst, if you could go back, you'd have appointed him? I tend to think that it was a good appointment at the time, and I think would have appointed him if I had to go back in time. He gave us Seville, which you can never take away. A heroic.
You're not swapping that night at Ibrox, no. Leipzig, and Seville for anything, are you?
No.
Let's be honest, and you can't go backwards anyway.
Yeah.
The thing for me is, and I'm going to try and be upbeat here. You know, I always try and be upbeat and try and be positive, and I'm going to do it here, Derek and Josh. I actually think this Rangers squad is not that bad. I actually think there's a lot of quality within it. There's problems, of course there is. Ryan Kent's contract, I think, if Rangers could get that tied up, that would be huge. Alfredo Morelos, I've already said, I don't believe that he's earned a new contract. I don't think he should necessarily even be considered until he shows a complete volte-face in terms of his attitude. His performance in the last game under Gio was dreadful, wasn't it? But if you're talking about quality, right? We know the goalkeeping situation's a little bit delicate, a little bit difficult, and a little bit imperfect. But Ben Davies, partner in Connor Golson at the back, that's championship winning quality as far as I'm concerned. No fears about that whatsoever. I really like the look of Yilmaz. I think between him and Barisic, you've got something on the left. We know what Tavernier's capable of when he's fully fit and flying on the right. Could possibly do with getting a little bit of more out of Devine as the backup for Tavernier, given he's not been playing that well. But I'm hoping that with the break that'll re-energise him. I think there's quality in terms of Cholak. There's quality in terms of Lundstrom. There's quality in terms of Fashion Sakala. I know people get frustrated with Fashion Sakala, and I've been someone that's been frustrated with him. But domestically, Fashion Sakala delivers for you. He can be frustrating, but he delivers. I think the midfield's the big issue that any new manager has to come in and solve.
Yeah.
We know Ryan Jack is quality. We know Glenn Kamara is quality, but with Kamara, it's about getting his head right. With Ryan Jack, it's about making sure he's fit. There are question marks over a lot of these players in that central midfield area, and that's going to be the key thing for any new manager to try and sort out. Getting Tom Lawrence back in there will be absolutely huge, Derek. I know you wrote about this earlier on last week, and I thought your piece was absolutely spot on. He's the one player that Rangers couldn't afford to lose this season, and they lost. He was the one that gave you that drive and that goal threat from midfield that they had. They went out and got him as a replacement to give you a little bit of what Joe Aribo departing gave the team. I think Tom Lawrence would have produced more in terms of domestic numbers than Joe Aribo. But he goes and gets a major injury, and there's not much you can do when that happens. It's a really difficult one, really sore one for the management team to take, and ultimately, I think it's proven to be one of many elements that became fatal for Giovanni Van Bronckhorst as the Rangers manager.
Yeah.
But I think these stuff there to work with. We all said that, barring maybe a midfielder or two, that Rangers squad was looking pretty good going into this season. You can't account for the amount of injuries that's been suffered. I mean, it's been unbelievable. And I think if Rangers can get players back, add a couple and a couple of real good ones in the window, then they'll be in good shape.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Okay, I think that will do us there. Just we'll finish on this. Origami Dinosaur with a nice little comment here. He says, signed up for the website today. Tidy site with writing that beats the red tops. Nice work, guys. Good to have you on board, buddy.
We should say, Derek, we should say about the £1 deal, because that's absolutely incredible. Just remind people again while we've got everyone on.
Our Black Friday offer that's been launched today. So it's sort of overshadowed by all the big news that's happening. But what a time to sign up, folks. Just £1 for 6 months worth of content. Head over to rangersreview.co.uk/subscribe for all the details. The link is in the title of this video as well. So I do urge you to go and check it out. You won't be disappointed. So much content on there just from today. Lots of reaction and fallout from Giovanni van Bronckhorst's dismissal earlier on this morning. A lot of analysis pieces of where it all went wrong for him at Ibrox. So do go check it out. We'll be back again tomorrow morning to talk all things Rangers again. As I mentioned, it may be the World Cup break, but certainly the Rangers news does not stop. So we'll be back again tomorrow to talk all things Rangers. But until then, enjoy the rest of your Monday evening.